Hello, welcome back to MATHY200 for Loyola New Orleans University. And this is going to be Chapter 7, Part 1. This is going to get into, we're going to get into a little more advanced HTML concepts, a little more advanced CSS concepts, and especially designing web pages for mobile apps that work on both mobile apps, tablets, and or mobile devices, tablets, and desktop browsers. So let's get going. Various learning outcomes you'll see here. I'm going to go just get into it here. All right, so we've talked about this briefly, but if you're using paths, if you're using subdirectories and directories on your website, you want to make sure that you get it to a relative location. Be careful about this. You know, in this case, we have images in the images folder, and you have logo, and you have scenery, and you have rooms folder with Canyon, and Javelina, whatever, and this events folder with a few files in here. This is not uncommon to have this, but if you want to get back to from Canyon over to the images, you have to go ... and then / images logo.gif. And by the way, the / versus / there's a whole debate about that. It honestly doesn't make much of a difference. Usually you're using / to find something, and / to usually using / for browsing around, but you can actually use / they kind of go hand in hand, but / is just a more typical convention these days. / is more of a Windows thing than a Apache and web thing. Okay, but it can go both ways. So we use ... So for instance, if I want to get back to home, I just go ... home, or just go / index.html. If I do the / without any dots before, ... means go up a directory. If I just have / index, it will always get me to the top level, assuming that this is the top level of your website. It'll get me to the top level of that website, and that'll give me my page. Now again, these directories might look ever so slightly, the structure should be the same, but they might be, you know, in a different folder on an actual website, so be careful about that. You know, it's the relative path might be specified, you know, public _HTML, and then that folder is your root folder, your top level folder for your website, typically speaking. So that way, when you have something under public _HTML or public HTML, then you'll have your index.html, that's your first page, and so on and so on. Okay, well, also we haven't really talked about this too much, but when you are going to a page with a site with without specifying a web page, pretty much every web server out there, Apache, Microsoft IIS, any of these other ones that are smaller, they usually have a list of default pages that's going to load up for you or for the user if they don't specify an actual file, an actual HTML file. So it's pretty cool, actually. So you can leave the index.html as long as you leave it off when you specify the address, and as long as it's one of these specific files that it's looking for. And index.html is almost always a gimme, or index, and it might go index.html then index.html. It might be backwards, it might flip that around. Okay, so you have to be careful about that, but usually you have one or the other. You usually don't have multiple possible defaults. You only have one that could be possibly a default. Okay, so be careful on this path. Just make sure you're putting it in the right location. With your assignments, you're just making them all in the same folder, typically speaking, although you might have an images folder, and you might have to specify them in your per images, especially when you get to the more advanced assignments or like your own web page. But actually, I don't think you're really doing that in any of these, the Java Gem and Prime properties. So we talked a bit about this, okay, with the difference between an ID and a class, and that ID is used once and only once in a page. And the reason for the ID, reason why we have that, is so that we can actually specify a location in a page, and that's the whole point of it being only once and only once. It's that specific location. So when you want to refer to that page, you can actually say ahref and then number sign or pound, and then whatever that ID is. And that link, if I click on this, it'll take me back to the top of the page. Okay, and you use that with an anchor tag. Now you can even do this within a page. Okay, I can link to home.html pound top. And if I use that for my AH reference, for my anchor tag, it'll load that page and then go to that location on that page. In this case, the top is just, you would have this div ID set at the top. Top is not necessarily the top of the page. It has to be located by setting an ID, either with a div or some sort of ID anywhere in the page. And then IDs and classes don't always have to happen to divs and spans. They commonly do, and it's very convenient to have them happen that way, but it's not limited to. Okay, so these are really, really cool. These are ways to link to various parts of the page, especially if it's a long page, which you technically should avoid. But you know, it's nice to be able to link to certain parts of your page. And usually you use IDs to specify a general location, like a heading 1 level. Heading level 1 usually is a place where you put an ID, just because that specifies that this is a very important location on that page. So they kind of go hand in hand. I'm really not going to talk about ARIA. Let's go ahead and skip that. These are kind of, that's not something we're going to worry about in this class. When you specify an anchor, you can tell it to tell the browser to open up. If you don't specify a target by default, it's going to just open up in that same page. You've all experienced that. But if you specify a target and say something like underscore blank or underscore new or underscore this page opens up in another page, or anything arbitrary, it'll open up in that, it'll create a new page. Presumably a new tab. We don't know. It depends on the browser. Okay, that is up to the browser. A new page or a new tab, and it'll go and put the contents of that link in there. Okay. Keep in mind that when you use the target, that if you use the same place, if you target something to the same place twice or 3 times, when you click on it the second time, it will open up into that. I mean, you're creating a page with that name, and it'll throw whatever contents back into that page. So if you have multiple target or multiple links with the same target, each time you click on a different link, it'll pop it back into that same page. It won't necessarily open a new one each time. Okay, so it's kind of a cool little trick, but you have to also be careful about it. Usually you want these to be, I think the exception is that is underscore new and underscore blank, because those will actually open up new pages generally always, but not a gimme. It depends on the browser, so you have to be careful and test it out. So what are we doing here? Yeah, we want to I like to avoid this type of thing, but you can do this. You can specify a large block of an area, and especially do it as a block element. You can set this to the style of block or display as block. You can do that and make it so that anywhere they click on this area will be a possible bump to that link. But I've tried to avoid. You really want to keep your links short and sweet and to the point. All right, we're going to pause right there and come back at this in a sec.